Well, students, welcome to week 2 of our Phone a Friend Sunday School edition. This week, as we continue on, we've got my good friend Patrick Meador joining us. He is the student pastor at the First Baptist Church of Pea Ridge. Patrick, how you doing today?
I'm great.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us, man. We're excited to dive in together. So our topic this morning, students, the lesson that we're gonna dive into. I've brought a self-proclaimed techie to us, but what we're going to talk about more specifically this morning is what is a biblical view of technology? What is technology? How do I use it? But obviously, more importantly, what does the Bible teach us about tech? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it neutral? Everything in between. So that's just kind of what we're going to dive into this morning, and we're gonna talk about it. So Patrick, first question here. Let's just kind of start pretty general. What is the purpose of tech? We'll kind of get rolling with that one.
Okay. I guess we could break this down into kind of two categories. You could say a primary purpose and a secondary purpose. And the primary purpose is going to be the same purpose for anything and everything that's out there. If you were to ask one of my youth, one thing I try to drill into them is when you're asked, what is your purpose? To glorify God, right? We can find that it's 1 Corinthians 10:31, whatever you do to the glory of God. I know there's a verse in Isaiah that says that we are created for God's glory, and that applies to anything and everything that's out there. I could look on my desk right here, my phone that's currently charging because it's on like 3%, or my coffee cup that's got some wonderful coffee in it. Somehow all of this is created for God's glory. And technology is the same way, whether it's the phone, the computer that we're doing the Zoom chat on. That's the primary ultimate purpose. But then there's kind of this secondary purpose. And that's where we kind of come in and get to have a part in that. We kind of go back to Genesis and see this biblical view where God says, subdue the earth. And you see this story kind of begin where they're in the garden, they're walking on dirt paths, and they're really not even living in tents. They're just out sleeping on the grass at that point, I guess, right? And you kind of see all of this go as they subdue the earth. Technology kind of begins. You look in Genesis 4, they start to build tents. They start to make instruments out of bronze and iron. And you can even look at it in the whole story of the Bible where in Genesis 1, it begins in a garden. And I know you've heard this, Adam, right? It begins in a garden, but the story ends in Revelation in a city, where you just kind of see this progression of technology. So that primary purpose is God's glory, but that secondary purpose is where we get to have a part, and we get to subdue the earth and build and cultivate technology and see it progress. I mean, we wouldn't have been able to do this 20 years ago, this video chat. And we can do this. We're doing this right now to God's glory. So you kind of see those two purposes there.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, and I love how you kind of lay that out there, of that progression, because in a sense what we see in there is that I like that division. And it's not that technology is God's primary purpose by any means, but within God's purposes for us, like technology is meant to play a role in that, and we see that in just the way, just the grand narrative of technology lays out. So that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, second question though, let's just kind of play devil's advocate. All right, so we've kind of heard the positive, but I mean, we've got teenagers, and every single one of these students, they've got probably a granddad or an aunt at home that's like, technology is just evil, and honestly, not in a sarcastic way, they've probably heard a message like that, or at least felt a message like that from church as well, and from religion. So let's kind of play devil's advocate and just ask the other side, just bluntly, is tech evil? And how would you kind of approach answering that question as a believer?
Right. And that's an awesome question. And I guess the way we would phrase it is, when we look at a computer, we look at a phone, we have to ask, is it an animate object or an inanimate object? Can it do things itself, or does someone have to control it, right? I remember having this conversation with my brother and dad a few years ago. We went to watch an OKC Thunder game, and we're on our way back. So we're stuck in the car for a couple of hours. We've got to find some things to talk about. And at the time, Google was really starting to develop some of the self-driving cars. And some of the questions that they were asking were, okay, what if the car's driving down a road and a kid runs into the middle of the street to get his basketball? They need to tell the car and the AI, the coding, what to do. The car needs to be told what to do. It can't make that decision itself, right? And so then it's got to figure out, do I turn left or do I turn right? Well, let's say if it has to turn right, there's a young mother pushing her baby in a stroller. So its only option left is to turn left. And then there's a car coming head on. So it's in this predicament. What do I do? The car can't think for itself. It had to be told what to do ultimately. And that's kind of where tech is. Tech is this inanimate object that has to be told what to do. And that's where, we with our hands code it, or we're swiping our phone. We're the ones who are controlling it. And so that really can answer that question quickly. No, technology is not evil. It's the people behind the screen who are using it in a bad way. And to go back to scripture again, I'm going to try to tie a lot of this back to the Bible if I can, and back to Genesis. I mean, Genesis is just packed with so much wisdom. In Genesis 11, where you get to the Tower of Babel, you see them start using the old-fashioned technology. They're building with bricks and they have mortar, and for them at the time that was probably very progressive, whereas we look at it now as like, that's almost ancient. And they were building, but they built for their own glory and not for God's glory. And that's kind of where we can see where tech itself didn't go evil. It's the human heart went evil after the fall, and we started using these things for our glory rather than God's glory. And we need to temper them and use them properly. And the example I like to use, last one I'll say, is water and fire are very, like heat and water are very good things, but only when they're tempered. I mean, we have to have water to survive, but too much water or water in the wrong way can drown us and kill us. We have to have heat to survive, but too much heat can harm us. And in the same way, technology is a wonderful benefit to us as creatures created for God's glory, but used in the wrong way, it can harm us. And that's where I would say tech itself is not evil, but the people behind the tech can really use it in a wrong way, and it can harm us from that.
I love that. I love that. And just that emphasis that you just said of it, it wasn't the tech that went evil. It was the heart that went evil. I love that. I think you're dead on there. And it's interesting. I mean, the first point you made in here, and the second one, it's almost like when we look at the Tower of Babel, there is kind of an irony there. I mean, because like you pointed out, our goal ultimately is to be in a city at the end of Revelation. And yet here they are in Babylon, and they're in a city. And you're like, well, how can that be wrong if that's what we're supposed to do? But it's exactly like you just said. It's because they were doing it for their own glory. It wasn't ultimately for God's. So no, I think that's awesome, man. Yeah, I love the way you laid that out. So since we as humans, I mean, ultimately that's where we're coming back to the book of Romans, since we're the ones that are inherently evil, right? We're the one that have evil in our hearts. Technology is inanimate. Ultimately, it depends on us behind it and what we're doing with it. What are some of the dangers in using modern tech? That'd be the third question. We've established that tech in and of itself is not bad, but it can be used for bad purposes. It can be used for bad things. And so what are some of those dangers for us to be aware of? And for our parents and our families watching this together with their teens this morning, just what are some of the dangers that we as Christians need to be aware of?
Yeah. And Adam, I could say this is the one we could spend probably 5 sessions on, where
Yeah.
there's so much stuff out there. So, well, I'll try and cut it in 1/10 of what I would probably normally do. And I'll just try to whittle it down to just a few simple points too. So I will say, I've got a few notes before me, so I'll kind of refer to those a little bit. I would say anonymity. We can think that we are anonymous when we're scrolling the internet, and we could think this both just in a worldly perspective and also in a biblical perspective. Both of these can kind of be dangerous because when you are online, your IP address is out there for anyone and everyone to follow. And there are companies that are specifically dedicated to, literally a person's job is just to follow your digital footprint and build a profile on you. And they sell that to marketing firms. They can sell it to companies who are wanting to hire you and get a feel for who you are. And maybe they don't know your name through your IP address, but when they see like, okay, this guy is in Camden, he's looking at men's basketball shoes, so this is a guy, you kind of see they're like, they can start whittling it down to where you are, who you are, and eventually they'll get a name. So there's that they follow your digital footprint. And if you really want to be freaked out, there's a plugin that you can put on Google Chrome called Disconnect, and you can literally see who all is following you as you go through. So that's a way to see that. But the other one is before God. He's that omniscient, all-seeing eye that, I mean, that's like that Sunday school answer that God sees everything you're doing, but he does. When you're scrolling, or when you're surfing the web, for, I guess we could say an old school term, now it's all scrolling. But when you're doing those things, you may feel like you're alone and no one sees what you're doing, but God sees, and he sees your heart behind it too. And when you try to delete browsing history, when you try to, bleach wash your digital footprint, you can't do that before God. But that's the hope of the gospel, where the blood of Christ not only can wash your heart whiter than snow, he can wash that digital footprint whiter than snow too. So there's that like glorious hope of what he's done for us in the midst of that. So that's one, is anonymity. These next three, I'd say, are a cycle. And I'd say these are probably the most, where I would say really hone in on these. If you hear anything through this Sunday school time, I'd say hear these 3 points. It's approval, addiction, and depression. In approval, what we want to do, and this is really dangerous in this time where we're social distancing, we can't get out there. We are going to try to create an image of ourselves through social media, since we can't create a normal image of ourselves face to face. And the question is, when we go back to face-to-face interactions, are we going to try to keep up the facade that we created? Are we going to try to continue the personality that we falsely made through social media, trying to gain and garner approval? We just want to get likes. We want to get followers. We want to get all those things because it makes us feel good. And that can lead to kind of that next one, addiction. So approval leads to addiction. And researchers can point out from the research that they've done, just like a drug addict, the dopamine release in the brain from when you have meth or cocaine, any drug that it may be, the same thing happens when you see a new like, a notification that someone has liked your Instagram post, that you have a new follower on TikTok, you have all these things. And that leads to just wanting more and more and more of it. And really more so creating this false facade of who you're not. And when you may not get the amount of followers, and when you may not get the amount of likes that you want, that leads to that last step, depression. And that depression comes right back around to approval. And let me say this, y'all, students, hear this. It's easy to see every other person's picture that you may see posted that looks perfect. For every perfect picture that they may post, you don't see the 100 imperfect photos that are behind that one perfect photo. And I don't want to sound like some prosperity gospel guy, but you are created in the image of God. You are valuable, okay? And just because you see someone else that may live this perfect life through social media and you feel like you don't, that doesn't mean they live the perfect life. We're all broken, okay? I heard Matt Chandler use this illustration. He said that, the Christmas card picture, he called it, you may receive this Christmas card photo from the family that looks so happy, so perfect, but what you didn't see is when the dog took a dump right after that photo, right? So understand that. And I will say, before I cover this last thing, temptation, I know I'm spending a lot of time on this question, but I feel like it's an important one. There are 2 research points that teens who spend 5 hours a day on their phone are 71% more likely to commit suicide. So that's just, I would say that's something to be aware of, and be very wary of how long you spend on social media, because that can lead you into that cycle and lead you to possibly do something that you should not do. And then the other one that we see is, in the rise of social media, the suicide rate jumped 24% when Facebook and Instagram and all these came about. So there is not an inherent danger with technology and social media itself, but that danger comes in the way we use it, and this cycle of approval, addiction, and depression. And it's just going to happen. So I'm not saying don't use it, but be careful how much you use it and where you place your identity. Social media is unstable. God's stable. Hold on to that stable identity that he gives you in Christ. And the last one I'll say is temptation. And I'll say this quick, is the people out there know exactly what you want. Marketers out there. Satan's a master marketer. You saw how he marketed himself to Adam and Eve back in Genesis 3. And these marketers know the way you think. Netflix, the CEO of Netflix said that he's not even worried about Hulu or Amazon Prime or any of these other companies. He said his main competition are the viewers themselves, because nobody watches movies on Netflix. Let's be honest. You binge watch the shows. And when you binge watch the shows, that's when they're getting that interaction and entertainment they want you to have. And when you're not binge watching, that means you're not watching Netflix. So they said the main competition is sleep. So they're trying to get by sleep. And Visine actually partnered up with Hulu a while back and said that if you're getting tired, you can't stay up to watch, buy Visine. I mean, it's crazy the extent that they're going to. And I can picture that old school commercial where you hear that guy with that monotone voice, Visine, except it doesn't crack like that. But I'd say those, man, are some of the dangers of using modern tech.
I mean, that's so interesting. I literally just saw a few days ago an ad scroll through on Facebook for Red Bull, and the tagline was, "Because one episode is not enough." I mean, that's exactly what you're saying, man. I mean, they're playing off of that, and I love how you're pointing out too, like so much of what this tech has done, and obviously we're talking about the negative side here. Like it's taking something within us that's already a struggle, and it's just like it's extenuating it, like it's making it more intense, so to speak. Like there's already a part of us that wants the approval of others, but it's like social media takes that and just puts it on such a wider scale.
Right.
That's where kind of that danger is. And so students, I would just add, to what Patrick has already said, like if you have parents that are trying to put limits on your technology use, as frustrating as that might be for you in the moment, praise God for that. Because hopefully what you're hearing from what Patrick is saying is that like they're doing that to look out for your good. And then the other side, because I know a lot of you don't, if you don't have parents putting limits on yourselves, then like students, you're not a kid anymore. You need to put limit on yourself. If you don't have an adult in your life doing it for you, not like we're saying, not because this technology is in and of itself bad, but just to be a healthy individual. Like, and that goes the same with everything, but especially with this. Well, Patrick, let's dive in just briefly a little bit to kind of the other side. We've talked about the dangers, but let's talk about that positive side. So our next question: how can we harness it for good? How can we take this technology and use it in a way that glorifies God?
Yeah. You actually just hit the nail on the head where you kind of said, let's limit it. I'm an Apple guy, like I'm doing this on a Mac. I use iPhone. So I don't know about the Android users out there, but I know on Apple, they came out with the screen time thing where you can limit it for yourself on social media. I have mine set for 30 minutes. If it goes beyond 30 minutes that I've used it in a day, any and all social media, I have to put in a password. And lately with everything going on, I've had to use more. But normally I try to limit myself to that 30 minutes. And I know that's really not much time. Some people may say an hour. There's no magic number on it. But that came out of a wonderful conviction that Apple had, because they knew some of the issues and the dangers that were out there. I think you and I have chatted about this, that back when Steve Jobs first came out with the iPad, a reporter interviewed him just to kind of get some facts about the iPad, see about the release, how's it doing, all that. He had just this random question at the end of the phone call interview and said, "Do your kids like the iPad?" And Jobs replied, I don't know. They haven't used it. We limit how much screen time our kids have. And that became the whole tagline of the article that that reporter then went and wrote. And that conviction continued with Apple to where they came out with that screen time thing. So limiting is one. That's huge. And if you think about that, limits are not bad, guys. Limits are good. Back in the Garden of Eden, God limited Adam and Eve from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but he didn't remove it for them, right? A fish only thrives in the limits of water. You throw it on land, it's going to die. Same thing with a boat or a jet ski. It can only thrive within the limits it has been given. And you and I can only thrive in the limits that we have been given, guys. So limit those things. The other thing I'll point out is monitor over eliminating. And if you cut these things out of your life right now and try to dive in when you're like 18 or 21 years old, you're going to dive in head first and it's going to overwhelm you and overtake you. So there are these apps out there that you can put on your computer and your phones. One of them, a big one, is Covenant Eyes. You've got like an accountability partner. And if you're prone to look at things or do things on your device that you probably shouldn't be doing that would not bring God glory, this is a wonderful thing that if you do one of those things, it'll send it to your accountability partner and they can reach out to you and be like, bro, what are you doing? So those are huge. So limit it and monitor it are what I would say, how we can harness it for good. And then the practical, how that's going to work out. How do we glorify God with it? That's going to look different with every person. I mean, we're doing it right now through this Zoom chat. So I don't think there's necessarily a specific way I can say to do that right now. But yeah.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think that's dead on. And just to piggyback off of that, students, part of the reason we're asking that is just because we want to encourage you to use technology while we're doing this to glorify God. And so instead of maybe using the social media kind of for that negative side, right, of propping yourself up, like use this time to glorify God. Like students, you've got friends that are going through a lot of these things we're talking about right now. Like you have friends going through this depression and going through this addiction and going through this seeking for approval. Maybe you're realizing that you yourself are going through it too. And so reach out to those friends using technology. Like right now would be a very good time for you to use it to glorify him. Help your parents understand how to use it because a lot of times you're ahead of them. I mean, that's another way you can glorify God, is just being a genuine help to others in your life who right now, because of this virus and because of the social distancing, are having to depend on technology in a way they never have before. And like, I like to consider myself, technologically aware. But our intern Lucas has had to hold my hand, not literally because we're not holding hands because social distancing, but he's had to hold my hand through a lot of this kind of stuff, y'all, to help me. He's glorifying God in that, by helping us, by just helping one another in this time. So that's great. Well, Patrick, you already kind of answered that, but just so that we kind of end with it explicitly, I know you said this earlier, but just so we've made a point of it, what is the hope that we do have? Because I don't want us to end this necessarily with a humdrum like, oh my gosh, technology's out to eat us, or we're all going to die. And I heard you say it earlier, but let's just conclude with it explicitly. What hope do we have?
I mean, this is going to be really profound, Adam. I don't know if they're going to be ready for this.
Can't wait.
Ready? Jesus. No, but really, it's going to feel like that typical Sunday school answer, but we look forward to Revelation and we see that everything's going to be one day redeemed. And technology is not going to go away, but all of the bad uses of technology are going to go away, and all that will remain are the ways of technology to glorify God. And that's the day that I long for. And if you think back to Genesis 1, when it was like, and it was good, and it was good, and it was good, it's going to be good again. And it's going to be very good. Like God said at the end of all creating everything, it's very good. It's going to work together well. And we're going to be able to work together and use it all for that one singular purpose of God's glory. So that's the hope that we have, is looking forward to that.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Patrick, just kind of our final question here. What are maybe one, two, maybe three questions that our students could just kind of be talking to their families, that our parents watching could just kind of talk about as a family as we close off here, but maybe just to kind of keep this conversation going at home. What are a few questions they could throw around themselves?
Yeah. One I would say is, does your phone control you, or do you control your phone? And you can apply that to your phone, your iPad, tablet, computer, whatever it may be for you. And the way that you can dive a little deeper with that question is to ask another one. How would you respond if you no longer had a phone? And that's the way it would really be revealing for you. Okay. So kind of put yourself in how you would answer that question. Number two is for you personally, because I said a few minutes ago, this is going to look different for everyone, how we use it for God's glory. How can you personally use technology to bring God glory? What specifically can you do without being vague or general? So be specific there. And the last one I would say is, with technology really causing us to be, we could say, alone together. So you see people sitting in a room, but they're all on their phones. So they're together, but they're alone at the same time. So what can we do as a family to develop more intentionality with one another? How can we maybe put technology aside and find ways to look each other in the eye rather than through screens, and spend some time together? So that'll look different per family, per person. But those are three great questions that could be asked.
That's great. That's great. Well, Patrick, thank you for those. And students, and families, parents, I will be putting those questions in the description to our video below, and so you'll be able to see those and hopefully talk about those at home. So as we kind of wrap this up, just a real quick reminder, students, don't forget that on Wednesday night at 6 o'clock we will be live streaming again. We will be in the book of James this time. You should already know that because we're going in order. We just finished Hebrews. We're in James. But be reading the book of James in preparation for that. Watch the Bible Project video in preparation for that. And if you have not signed up for our Remind group yet, what is wrong with you? You need to get on there and you need to get signed up so I can be communicating with you. Patrick, thank you so much, man, for joining us, for sharing your wisdom, for giving us your time, man. I really appreciate it.
You bet, man.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right, students, be safe. We love you, and we're hoping to see you soon.